Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Janum Institute, I'd like to welcome you to this post-mortem on the election. I think it's fair to say that the large audience we've got at a reasonably early hour is an indication of real interest and I think to a degree of some surprise. Very few people predicted the character of this result. Balash and I discussed it, and we were expecting a somewhat different result. He will describe his views in the future, but nobody, I thought, very few people indeed, except for one expert who said, I've looked at all the polling figures, and if they're accurate, there's either going to be a narrow win for the opposition or a big win for Fidesz. So that was a very interesting judgment, and it turns out that the more unexpected of the two results is the one that came about. Now, I think I should be honest and say what I thought, and before I hand over to the experts to describe what happened and why. I thought that there was going to be a victory of a moderate kind for the government, and I gave 4 reasons for thinking so. This is 2 or 3 days before the election. And then I gave 4 reasons for why the opposition had won if they had turned out to win. And the reasons for the government winning were, I said, well, first of all, the government has provided, in the views of the voters, successful economic government and administrative government over the last few years. And that's something which most of people covering politics underestimate. Government's been conducted competently and with some economic success over a period of well, more or less 8 years. And the voters, I'm going to quote the New York Times on that. They had a piece in which they summarized the government's achievements as follows. Government debt as a proportion of Hungary's gross domestic product has fallen more than 6 percentage points. The country's credit ratings have improved. The budget deficit has roughly halved. Growth has almost quadrupled. Wages have risen by more than 10%. Though still high, deprivation has fallen by nearly half, not least in places like a small village where villagers benefit from their work-fair wages. Officially, unemployment has dropped by nearly 2/3. Now, the writers of that went on to make serious qualifications and even some corrections. But there is no doubt that that was the general picture which the voters had, and when voters face those kind of situations, they tend to support the government. The second reason was, of course, the immigration issue, which the Prime Minister had seized the issue on that 2 years ago and made it the flagship issue of his government well before the election. In effect, he turned himself into a kind of anti-Merkel who would protect Hungary and Europe from a non-military invasion of migrants. And if he weren't around, the message ran, they would keep coming. He benefited. The third issue was Orban's personal image as a strong political leader who would protect Hungary against whatever dangers threatened it. And finally, but not least, I think I suggested he would win because the opposition was divided among too many parties to mount an effective challenge against him. So they were the reasons I thought would explain his victory. But what about the reasons that would explain his loss? Well, I suggested that if he, in fact, lost, the reasons would be as follows. And they're not dissimilar from the reasons why he won. One, I suggested, was that he and the Prime Minister personally and the party in general had devoted too much of their campaign to the mass migration issue, and they were too heavy-handed in their exploitation of it. They'd already won on that issue, and all they needed to do was remind the voters every now and then, while emphasizing other winning topics and neutralizing those issues which were on which they were unpopular. Instead, they hammered it home relentlessly and used language in relation to Soros and others that many moderate Fidesz supporters in Budapest found distasteful. Probably won them votes, I suggested, but a cooler appeal would have done the same. Equally, I didn't think in the campaign the government made quite enough of its economic record. I mean, it mentioned it obviously, but it didn't seem to me that it seemed to me that they could have done more. Thirdly, some of the spending, which obviously governments spend money for many reasons, but one of them is to get people to vote for it. Some of the spending intended to get votes was unexpectedly misdirected and provoked annoyance rather than gratitude. I don't know how many of you had this experience, but I found a lot of people complained about the lavish spending on sports facilities and comparing this unfavorably with the money that was needed for hospitals and education. And then finally the corruption issue, which of course was damaging in part because of the postal wars, which highlighted it strongly. Now, they were my reasons for thinking the government might lose. Well, the government didn't lose. And I think, but I will now say what the real reason for my getting it wrong, for not realizing that the government was going to win as big as it did, was a very simple one. I live in Budapest. And in Budapest, of course, the opposition won. And it did very well. And furthermore, in the kind of circles in which one moves, opposition supporters, critics and so on, well, obviously people one meets over coffee every day, having a drink in restaurants. And inevitably, the kind of atmosphere that prevailed in Budapest was one in which the government was, with some people, unpopular, but even when popular, was not expected to do as well as it did. Now, I've laid my cards on the table, how I got it wrong. Now I'm going to invite two speakers to tell us exactly why, what happened first of all, and why it happened. I think we're extremely fortunate. I'm going to introduce in having two speakers who I think will give us a detached but informed account. First of all, let me introduce Balázs Orbán. Balázs is an old friend. He's been, I think, this must be the third or the fourth post-election analysis you've joined us on the platform for, and I want to thank you. Balázs is a lawyer. He works also with, he lectures in law. He works also with the Zazaveg Foundation on migration policy. And I will simply say that I've generally found your forecasts of elections to be accurate, marginally off this time, but you've always given me good reasons for believing why you thought that a particular result would come about, and now I look forward to the reasons you're going to give us on why this particular result did come about, because it's an important, interesting result, and it's making waves. Balázs.
John, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies. Thank you for the invitation. It's a privilege to be here. Every international environment, I have to start with the clarification that although my family name is Orbán and I work for a think tank which is an advisor of the government, I'm not related to the Prime Minister. Unfortunately, everything would be easier, but yeah. Yeah, especially after Sunday. So, I try to keep it as short as possible, and after that I hope that we will have a roundtable, more than a roundtable discussion and a panel discussion than a lecture. So, according to my interpretation, the result, it wasn't surprising. The victory itself for the current governmental parties is not a surprise, but the two-thirds majority, it was even surprising for us. So personally, I didn't expect this huge victory for the government. Although our public opinion polls at Századvég and actually all the public opinion polls showed the opposite. So all the public opinion polls were right, and all the public opinions showed it correctly. But we didn't believe even to our polls. And we tried to, I can remember in the last weeks and months, we tried to change the methodology always, that we were thinking about whether there is a problem with the methodology. So we should do something differently, or we can believe in our polls, but it turned out that the methodology was right, and the results are looking like this. The reason why everybody had this kind of feeling was the bubble where we live in, the media bubble, and the special situation of the opposition. Because after a while, I think it was a couple months ago when it turned out that Botka Laszlo Botka will not be the leader of the opposition or the leader of the left parties. It turned out that for the opposition is not anymore a feasible strategy to build something up. So for them to build an alternative, it wasn't an issue in the last period of the campaign. And it turned out after the 15th of March that they are not capable of mobilizing the people. They are not capable of bringing the people to the streets, which is also an important political tool. We all have to know that bringing protest voters to the streets, it's an important tool. But they were not capable of using it. So their only strategy, their only pattern toward the success was to create a bubble in the international media and in the domestic national media and in the social media, which changes everything. And that's what we experienced during the campaign period, and especially in the last couple weeks, that this kind of media bubble, which wants to increase the turnout and increase the number of dissatisfaction voters, that's their only chance, what they got. And why it, if you ask me why it couldn't be successful, I also have three answers. The first and the most important answer, which cannot be underestimated, as John mentioned, is the economy and the economic success of the current government. So it's just if grassroots Hungarian voters have the experience that the GDP is growing, the salaries are rising, there is an extension of workplaces all around the country. It's simple, this kind of economic dissatisfaction is not present in the country. According to our polls, grassroots Hungarians, they have a positive attitude towards their future right now. The majority of the Hungarian voters feel like this. If we ask the question whether you believe that your children will have a better or a worse life than you got right now, the answer, which comes from the majority of the Hungarian voters, is yes. So the majority of the Hungarians, they do think that the life of their children will be better than their life was, which is not only our poll, and not only our poll from Hungary, but we also have a project, it's called Project 28. We created a huge, we had a huge survey in every single European member state, and as I can remember it correctly, the Pew Research Center also has this kind of public opinion poll, and it turned out that there is a division in Europe. So the Western Europeans are more pessimistic than the Eastern Europeans right now, and it's especially true in connection with the Hungarian voters. So the Hungarian voters, they are extremely optimistic compared to other Eastern European voters and compared to the Western European voters right now in an economic sense. And the second issue, as John also correctly mentioned, is the migration. What we can experience in European politics nowadays is that it's an issue, and it's the most important European issue in every single country. So there is no exception. It's the most important political issue in Italy, which is the main transit country right now, and it became a receiver country as well in the last years. It used to be the major issue in connection with Brexit, but also in the German elections, Austrian elections, all the other elections. Even in the Czech Republic, it was the top of the priority list, which can be surprising because the Czech Republic right now currently is not even a transit country, and they didn't have any experience about the current migration, irregular migration wave. But that's an issue which is important, which is very visible and very important for all the voters, also for Hungarian voters. They cannot see any irregular migrants right now in the country, but according to our polls, they do have experiences what the country had to deal with in 2015 and 2016. So back at that time, we had an opinion poll which said that 25%, at least 25% of the people or their families had direct contact or conflict with the people who were in Hungary, who were marching across to Hungary. I'm talking about direct contact, so I'm not talking about that they saw these people in the television. Direct contact, it means that they saw them in the railway station, they saw them on the highway, they are living on the southern part of Hungary, so that's 25% of the Hungarian population. That's quite a huge number. So, although there are no irregular migrants right now in Hungary, every Hungarian voter knows that how it looks like when the biggest transit wave, migration wave goes across the country, and everybody understands that it's not the case anymore because the Hungarian government established the fence. The only answer to this reality from the opposition part was that migration is not an issue anymore, and the campaign shouldn't be about migration, which is not the proper answer in this situation. And my third solution or answer would be the opposition itself, to the lack of opposition. I think that right now what we can see is there is a polarization of the political parties all around the world. So one part of the political parties, we can identify them as sovereigntist or localist political parties, and the other political formations we can identify as globalist. It does not mean that the sovereignist or the localists are denying globalization as a fact, but it does mean that the sovereigntists and localists are saying that the globalization and globalism is not a clear-cut positive phenomenon. So it means that localist and sovereignist political formations, they say that globalization has positive effects and negative effects, and they somehow their policy is based on and the top priority for their policy is to try to avoid the negative effects of globalization. And this kind of political polarization is very visible in Hungary, and that was a trap which was created by the government and which was actually what happened with the opposition. So they became the globalist political formations. Every opposition party, the Jobbik and the left-wing opposition, they maneuvered themselves into the position of the globalist elite, which is not a good position right now in the current European political situation. And they didn't realize until the very last moment that it's a huge mistake. And it was a huge mistake from the Jobbik side, which tried to rebrand. They tried to rebrand themselves, and they tried to collect voters from the left side, which meant that they had to change their position and they had to maneuver themselves toward the globalist position, near to the left-wing opposition. And in this current European environment, political environment, where sovereignty is very important, where the never-ending integration of the European never-ending integration of the European Union is questionable. That was a huge mistake. So that's why we can talk about a lack of real sovereigntist, localist opposition forces. And without these sovereigntist, localist opposition political formations, the opposition couldn't be successful, and the government could collect more votes, which is the most shocking or inspirative part of the story, that they could collect more votes than they collected in 2014. So, and which is, on the other side, it's understandable, because just think back what was the numbers of the quota referendum in 2016. In 2016, almost 3.4 million voters supported a position in connection with the migration case, but it wasn't only a migration issue, it was an issue of sovereignty. So the 2016 referendum was like the Brexit, it was a sovereignty issue. So back that time, 3.5 million voters supported a position, the position of the government. 3.5 million, never more than 2.7 million people voted for Fidesz. So it means that they had a huge plus from the opposition voters as well. And it turned out that they were able to keep at least 300,000 new voters since 2016, and they were capable of transforming the votes which came from 2016 to the general election voters. That would be my short summary. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Now I'd like to invite Boris Kalnucki to speak. Mr. Kalnucki is a distinguished foreign correspondent for Die Welt in Germany. He was born in Germany and brought up in Germany, the USA, and France. But he is from a Hungarian family which left the country in 1947, I think. And you've recently written a book about the history of your family. So you obviously both have local and globalist knowledge. And I look forward to what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies. It's a privilege for me as well to be able to be to yes? Hello? Better? Much better. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, hello. It's a privilege for me to be here, and there's not much left for me to say in the sense of analysis, really. I think Balázs left the most important bit for the end. I do think that the referendum of 2016 as a tool of voter mobilization was extremely effective, and we of course had no chance of seeing its effect in a general election until now. At that time, many people registered to vote. They stayed in the registers, and as you say, that helps to explain the high turnout that you didn't dare to prophesize. I would like to ask you actually, why did you not believe your own numbers? It's okay that you tell us you didn't, but why didn't you believe them? And then I go on.
Because we live in the same media bubble.
Exactly. So the most surprising thing for me in election night was Fidesz or close to Fidesz VIP people bumping into me and asking me, Boris, did you expect this result? And clearly they didn't expect it. Well, if they didn't expect it, I mean, who would have? And I'm not surprised that I know that the people who informed them, that is Balázs and Mrác Ágoston from Nézőpont, they didn't tell them either. So I would like to well, first of all, the title of today's talk is What Happened and Why. What happened, as the Prime Minister reminded us on election night, is that he won. And as to why, I think we have pretty much summed it up. I don't know which American president it was in an electoral campaign who said, are you better off now than 4 years ago? Was it Clinton or Reagan? I can't remember. Reagan. And the answer is Hungarians are better off than 4 years ago. They are better off than 8 years ago, much better off than 8 years ago. And especially we international correspondents tend to underestimate these kinds of elements and to overestimate the importance of things like media freedom or state of law or state of democracy in voters' minds. Shall we, having said all that, shall we go on to what comes next? At least some, some pointers at what might come next. Mr. Orbán did not need to make even a single electoral promise in this campaign. I don't think any politician in Hungary or Europe, for that matter, has ever had a stronger and at the same time freer mandate. He can really think about what he wants to do in the future and then do that. What might be some pressing points for him to take into consideration? When we look at the election results, I can't help but notice that there is one weak point for Fidesz, and that is the youth vote, even though people are optimistic about their future. Fidesz seems to be underrepresented in the segment of 18 to 29-year-olds. They got 38% of the vote in that segment. Jobbik was overrepresented in that segment with 31%. And if to put it crudely, this would mean that Jobbik has a future here, whereas Fidesz must worry about the future. You can't have a future without the youth. So I would surmise that the government will try to do something to become more attractive to young people. And if I remember correctly, Mr. Orbán mentioned the youth specifically in his address about the state of the nation. What might that be? Maybe Balázs can share some thoughts with us. What could a Fidesz government do to become more attractive to young voters? One element might be the lineup of the next government. Let's see what happens. Maybe we will see younger faces. I really don't know, but maybe you can tell us something about this. Yes, on the one hand, voters are better off than 4 years ago. And what was the alternative? What did the opposition come up with as a counter-proposal? It was nothing, really. It was the promise to have new elections after the elections, and in between lots of infighting, and after that more infighting. I don't think that can be attractive to many citizens of any country. If we look at what will happen with the opposition now, it may be worthwhile dwelling on Jobbik a little bit because they have such an impressive show amongst young people. And Balázs mentioned that we have a lack of local, sovereignist opposition. I could well imagine that after Mr. Vona stepped down, there will be a local sovereignist challenge to current Jobbik leadership, and that Jobbik may reposition itself to where it came from and again become that kind of challenge to Fidesz. However, it would then be again under a glass ceiling where it can't really break out because it's considered to be radical, too radical to be taken seriously. That is really... Oh, yes, one other thing I would like to share with you is I do think it is a concern on the heart of Mr. Orbán that although it's very important for him, and of course it's what he's all about, to continue a sort of emancipation policies in the framework of the European Union. That does not only concern Hungary, but all of the Visegrad countries, all of the new members of the European Union. I do think he is the champion of a strategy of emancipation from having the West tell you what is best for you. Let's think with our own heads and then try to do that. That's what he stands for. I do think he needs to continue to do that. It's very good that he does that. But I do think he sees it as a problem that relations with Germany are politically so difficult. Not at the regional level. Relations with the Bundesländer, the equivalent of states in the United States, are often excellent. Economic cooperation is very good, but the relations with the foreign ministry in Germany, the relations with Chancellor Angela Merkel, are not so good. And I do think that he sees the problem. And maybe will make an attempt to somehow mend the relationship. I am not sure how. Probably this may include, well, this may of course include economic policies that are beneficial to German companies, as long as they're not detrimental to Hungary. It may include a readiness to align himself with Germany in some areas of foreign policy, for instance, the strategy vis-à-vis of Russia, and also vis-à-vis of Donald Trump. Let's not forget, Mr. Orban was the first chief of government in the EU to actually support Mr. Trump in his electoral campaign. But at the moment, I can very well imagine that the Hungarian government will come out and say, we must do something against America's trade policies. We, as the European Union, we ask Germany to give the lead here, and we do think that that is necessary. One almost self-evident aspect of that is, of course, that German car industry is so strong in Hungary, and if the United States follow a policy that is detrimental to German car industry, that's detrimental to Hungarian economic interests. And that is really all that I have to say for the moment.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, before I throw open the questions from the floor, perhaps I could just ask two questions. First of all, Balázs, one of the first things that happens after an election is politicians start planning for the next one. And the first step is to look at the exit polls. Have there been any serious exit polls? I got from Mr. Kalnoky's remarks the indication that there have been, and if so, I wonder what. And if you have any comments on what you know about this. And secondly, as part of the same question really, which particular groups do you think, or were there any groups which went away from Fidesz and towards the opposition? As you know, in every election, there's a lot of churning. Different people move in different directions. We look at the average turnout. But it would be I was wondering whether there were any examples of a serious kind, in number terms, of those moderate Fidesz people who didn't like the tone of the Fidesz campaign and who switched votes or stayed at home.
Yes, so first about the young supporters of the Fidesz and the young voters. So in every election, the turnout looks like this. I mean, these are the young people and these are the old people. So it always looks like this. That's the general attitude in a democracy. Because if you are young, I was more than 24 years old when I first started to deal with politics. Before that, I dealt with football and girls and things like that. So it's always more important for young people to deal with different issues which are linked to their own personality. And after a while, this kind of community issues are becoming more and more important, and the turnout of the elderly generations are always increasing. That's a general trend. And we knew that, and the opposition knew that. So what their strategy was to increase the turnout, not like this, but to increase the turnout like this. And that's why they wanted to collect voters from from the opposition, from the group of the young people. But it didn't succeed. So the turnout increased like this and the more like this. And I think if the Fidesz wants to follow the current strategy, which is that we need a party which is huge, a leading party, which is in the center of the political spectrum and can act without a coalition partner, then they have to follow this kind of strategy and they have to focus, stay in focus with the median voter. Because if you focus on the young voters, then you cannot increase the level of participation. It's such a huge amount. A government party can never be a party for young people. A government party can always be a party for the families or for the elderly generations, to put it so simple. So what you, Boris, mentioned, it's important and it's visible that among the young voters, the general support of Fidesz is not, we cannot say it's low, but it's lower than in another social groups. And I think the Fidesz has to work on that, but it's more a recruitation problem, not a voting collection problem. So that's how I would put it like this: that it's a recruitation problem for Fidesz, that they have to find new young people who are enthusiastic about the Fidesz politics and who are ready to step in the political area and publicly support Fidesz. But that's more like a recruitation problem, not a general political problem. Yeah, just one more comment. And what John asked, what I saw from the numbers is that there is an existing shift or swifting of the voters, what you mentioned, that just think about the results in the 12th district and in the 1st district and the 2nd district here in Budapest, where the traditional moderate Fidesz voters are. The results of the Fidesz candidates were lower than it was expected. Just think about the situation of the head of fraction, Gergely Gulyás, who is an extremely popular politician and who is somehow the key figure and the key character of a moderate Fidesz politician. And against it was a hard victory for him in the 12th district against a candidate who comes from the old regime for sure. So not a young left wing politician, but really who represents the previous socialist era. And it was a hard victory for Gergely Gulyás. So it means that in some areas, some constituencies, this is an existing phenomenon. And my last comment would be about the geopolitical maneuvering position and the foreign policy of the government. I think they have to, I agree with you, they have to continue their foreign policy strategy, which is very successful, and it's based on one simple principle that we need a strong region, we need a strong Central Europe, and we need a strong Hungary in the Carpathian region, inside the Carpathian basin, and in this region as well. That's how the foreign policy of the current Hungarian government looks like. And this will definitely be a conflict-based foreign policy, because right now the European politics is a conflict-based system, and especially after Brexit or during Brexit, it's extremely important to have a unified V4 position and have a unified Central European voice. And that's how we can understand that even those politicians who are not coming from the same political groups, they can agree with each other and they can deeply cooperate with each other. Just think about Robert Fico, the Slovakian Prime Minister, and Viktor Orban, who represents the right, and Robert Fico represented the left. Yeah, and I agree with you on that comment as well, that Germany is very important for Hungary, and it's a problem right now that on the top of the German politics there is a lack of communication. There is no problem with the German-Hungarian cooperation on a field of economy and on a field of local politics, but on a field of the top of the politics, there are some kind of tensions. And the Prime Minister thinks that for Germany, the most important and the biggest alliances could be the V4 countries. So Viktor Orban believes that Germany should recognize that the biggest partner of Germany and the most important partner for Germany shouldn't be France or shouldn't be any other country, but it should be the V4 countries. And he will definitely work on that issue. I don't know whether he will be successful or not, because politics is not always about strategy and not always about facts. It's also sometimes about emotions, and without emotions, with emotions, it's not easy to build something, or against emotions, it's not easy to build something, but that will definitely be an important part of the next next term foreign policy. And it's always, the Hungarian foreign policy, it's always based on 4 pillars. Strong V4 cooperation, relationship with Germany, relationship with Russia, and relationship with Turkey. These are the 4 pillars of the Hungarian foreign policy. So I don't know whether Hungary can shift the focus from Russia towards Germany, or what you mentioned, that it
maybe more so in
more
trade
more
relations with the United States.
Yeah, so the United States, I think what you said about the United States, it's more likely to happen than it happens in connection with Russia, because the energy dependency and the economic cooperation and the geopolitical position of Russia is more important for Hungary than with other countries.
Thank you. Very interesting. Perhaps I could ask you, Boris, to pick up something there. Is it the case, in your view, that we've now moved in Hungarian politics, but perhaps also more widely in European politics, from a left-right spectrum to one in which you have a central party of a broadly a centre-left or centre-right party dominating the middle, with a small socialist party on the left, or progressive party on the left, and a small nationalist or ethno-nationalist party on the right? Because that certainly seems to be the situation here. And when one looks at other European countries, you can see not exactly the same pattern, but similar tendencies. And I wonder if you think that is the case. And secondly, if it is the case, what follows from it?
It's often said that elections are won in the middle, and the big two-party systems that we have had in many European countries are an expression of economically sound countries with a strong middle class, usually a middle class that feels comfortable because it is the beneficiary of government subventions many times. If you took those away, I think we would have a different situation in Germany as well. And we have seen in the economic crisis of 2009 a fraying at the fringes of the middle class. We have a reduced well-off middle class today in many countries, and that has consequences for the political landscape. The two dominant parties, Christian Democrat and Social Democrat in many countries, are both getting smaller. Interestingly enough, I think in Hungary we see almost the opposite. We see the emergence of a strong middle class thanks to focused policies of Fidesz, trying to achieve just that. And this is maybe also one of the reasons why the party is so successful. People are better off, and a middle class is emerging in Hungary. Left, right, well, that has completely disappeared in terms of parties that favor what Umverteilung, it's a redistribution, and parties who don't. I think we're away from that now. Fidesz is a party that does in part redistribute money, that does take social concerns seriously. The same with Jobbik. I think who do we have left who doesn't think so? So much more than the earlier fault line of distribution, redistribution, or liberal principles of let everyone be the master of his own destiny. We have a redefinition of the political landscape into globalist and anti-globalist forces. What does that even mean? I am not sure. Maybe I'm too old for that, but Balázs, maybe you have some thoughts.
Well, actually, just so you finish the first thought, it sounds to me as though you're saying that the inspiration behind the social policy of Europe today, including the Fidesz, is Bismarck. I mean, government intervention to produce, first of all, welfare for people who need it, but secondly, to produce the opportunities, and indeed more than the opportunities, sometimes the raw money, to build a strong middle class. A more interventionist policy than, say, the Anglo-Saxon world would think usual or normal.
Well, Bismarck would be the starting point. He was confronted with the emergence of social democracy, social democratic party, quite a bit more radical than what we have today. And of course, the history of Europe was social history and economic history of Europe was defined by huge conflicts between the haves and the have-nots. And in Germany, the last Second World War was really the moment where they thought we must do something to prevent the emergence of radical political forces because mayhem ensues, and the way to do that is to appease society by just having everyone have enough money to live comfortably. So this led to a policy of what was called social market economy. Yes, you have a market economy, but you try to have everyone participate in the benefits of that by redistributing loads of money via the government. And the invention of that policy is really the reason why today you cannot distinguish almost at all between social democrats and Christian democrats in Germany. And that is right now collapsing. Or not collapsing, but getting weaker.
And also the social democratization of the Christian Democrats is seen by some to be a problem. Have you any comments before we throw it open to the floor?
I agree with you that the government is more an interventionalist than the redistributionalist, in a sense that I think that it will continue this interventionalist policy in the public policy areas, and especially because of the two-thirds majority. So with the constitutional majority, it's easier to follow this interventionalist strategy. But on the other side, the general rate of redistribution, it got lower than it used to be in 2010. So that's also an important part of the Fidesz strategy, and it affects also the middle class positively, I mean.
Now, let me throw open the debate to the floor. I see...
One microphone.
Oh, right.
Okay.
No, you keep it. You're answering questions. Any questions?
And Max, our young student from the LSC, will perform microphone duty.
And this is by the gentleman right by.
Thank you. If I am right, I did not hear once Brussels mentioned. Is that correct? It's interesting, Brussels. It's interesting to see because we are talking about Germany and the right of Germany, the participation of Germany and Russia, but we are not talking about the rest of Europe. And when you talk about Brussels and you talk about smaller countries like Hungary, you are also talking about countries like the Netherlands and Belgium and Luxembourg. And as Mr. Delors finds himself in the position to have invented the European Union, I might say that the Benelux was prior to that. It was the EEC that was formed by 3 smaller countries to protect themselves from France and Germany. Whereas Hungary, all the time in history, has focused on Germany and on that part of Europe, and never on other countries in the European Union. Isn't that a mistake again? Because if you want to have the center of Europe to be positioned here in Budapest or near the Central European Union and Russia, in fact, you are departing from the rest of the European Union. And it's all about economy. It's not about politics. It's the strength of the German economy that attracts countries like the Czech Republic, Poland, etc., etc. So it's not about culture, it's about finance. And in my view, if you look at the history of Hungary, I would ask the question, isn't that again a mistake in the policy?
Thank you. But may I just say that would people just announce, if they're representing an organization or a country or something, if they could simply announce it? No. Oh, sorry.
I'm just an individual from the Netherlands. So.
Yes, and that's a perfectly proper claim too. In fact, sometimes the claim to be a citizen is the strongest claim you can possibly make. So, thank you. First of all, Boris, would you like to begin the answer to that?
I suspect that whenever you propose something to the Fidesz government that promises a benefit in terms of money, they will jump at it. I don't think they would ever refuse that. I also do not think that it's all about money and nothing about culture. I would even propose that it is Mr. Orban's strategy to have a change of culture in Europe. It is what he tries to bring about. When you say Hungary is leaving the spirit of the European Union, the European spirit, whatever the formulation was, I think it is the strategy of Mr. Orban and other politicians in the region to explain to the rest of Europe that they do not share certain views that are dominant in the West, but they are European. They are maybe in their sense more European than in the West, because it is the West that has changed culturally and not the East. And so we have a rivalry right now between a value system in the West that differs from that in the East, and the East seems to want to mount a challenge and see if it can win the intellectual debate in this area as well as in migration policies, because that debate, I think, has been won by Mr. Orban on the intellectual level.
Just one comment to that is what the Central and the Eastern Europeans think is that in Western Europe there is the top-down policy making is extremely dominant. So which means that the elites, the political elites, the economic elites, the media elites, the opinion leaders, they are the leading tones, and they convince the voters, and that's how the voters make the decisions. Sometimes sometimes it's a successful story, sometimes it's not. Just think about Brexit. But in Hungary, and the Hungarian government thinks it differently. They say that it's not just about culture, not just about value system. It's about the principle that we simply have to accept and understand how our people, how the voters think. So they prefer, in a lot of cases, not the top-down policy making, but the bottom-up policy making strategies. And what I see from our political polls made in other EU countries as well, that the general grassroots opinion is not different. So that's why I'm saying that according to my interpretation, a general German value system of a grassroots German voters is not extremely different from the general Hungarian value system. Okay, so Herr Spengler is agreeing with me, which is always a good sign. So there is no difference between the value system. But there is a huge difference between the policy-making strategies. And the Western European democracies, they are somehow locked in their status quo, and they prefer, in every case, the top-down policy-making. And the Eastern European new democracies, they're not locked in their democratic system, so they can use this kind of bottom-up policy-making strategies. And the migration issue, it expresses it very well. Just one comment in connection with Brussels. There is a quotation that in Hungary everybody is a sovereigntist, which is true. So we have a small globalist elite, but that's part of our value system, and I can imagine that it's not the same in Germany. But here in Hungary, everybody is a sovereigntist. So it means that we are a rebellious type of people who like freedom, who like to make decisions, and our history was always about our freedom and our sovereignty. So that's the key pillar. That's why the opposition cannot be successful in the current European environment.
That's particularly interesting to me because, of course, if you look at these things from an Anglosphere or Anglophone standpoint, people in the English-speaking countries tend to think that one of the things which separates us from the whole of continental Europe, apparently not Hungary, you tell me, is this belief that that there's more genuine popular sovereignty expressed through institutions in England there is in continental Europe, that elites are less powerful and so on and so forth. Of course, there's a good deal of self-deception in those kind of discussions. Can I have the rest? Yes, gentlemen?
So I'm a journalist, so usually I don't ask questions, but now I have one. It's about the old division of urbanites and populists, let's say, that we have saw in the Donald Trump election, that the coastal urbanite elites are very different from the rest of the country, and it's something like that the big metropolitan areas voted for Hillary Clinton, so it's not the division between member states, but urbanite areas against rural areas. And here also we have seen, maybe I have read in the Szombat magazine, that there is the progressive Budapest and the ultra-conservative rural areas of Hungary are against each other. Do you have something say about that? Is it just a normal affair of the things from the Greek times going on, or there is something new or deeper division now than before? Thank you.
Let me pass that first to Balázs, with the additional point that is there not perhaps in these results between Budapest and the country a gulf between the intelligentsia on the one hand and the government on the other?
Yeah, so the urban-rural conflict, I think that's an existing conflict spectrum all around Europe and all around the Western world. But we're misunderstanding the Hungarian elections if we try to use it as a general explanation. Budapest was always the headquarter of the left. So it's always left and the socialist-based. It has always been a left and a socialist-based political era. The only exception was 2010, where there was a huge protest votes against the socialist, the previous socialist government. But in 2015, the signs were there, which showed that they could win, although the landslide victory of Fidesz in 2015, they could won 8 constituencies, and right now they could win more constituencies, but that's business as usual. I would put it like this. So the conflict is there. The rural-urban conflict, but it's not so strong as it is in the United States or in other Western countries. Just think about the results which came from countryside towns. So from Debrecen, from Győr, from Szeged, from Pécs, the positions of Fidesz are still strong and stronger than we would expect it.
It is of course a fault line that drives politics, not just in Hungary but also in Germany. If you look at election results there and popular support for the different parties, you will see that conservatives don't do as well in the big cities, and that was in fact the reason for Mrs. Merkel's policy of going to the left, of opening her party towards the left. What was it called again? Bunter, wie war das? Bunter, weiblicher, was? Bunter, weiblicher und kritischer. Städtischer. So yes, it drives politics, and let's see. I mean, it not now, but in the future, maybe we will see something on the Fidesz side as well. If they see that they are missing the youth, they're missing Budapest, and people are leaving the countryside, then over time we may come to a situation where they need to do something about it. At the same time, if you look at Bavaria, for instance, the Christian Social Party very consciously focuses on strengthening small towns in the countryside, because they know that is where their support comes from. So much for that.
Yeah, Frank Spenger, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. Prime Minister Orban once said that we do not only respect the Germans, but we like them. So we have a special relation since generations, and I'm absolutely certain it will keep like that. Doesn't matter who's in power in Germany or in Hungary. We have a special relation. Second, my questions. Again, Prime Minister Orban said that he is the head of a government of 11 million freedom fighters. But to me, it seems that these freedom fighters are very disciplined, especially in regard to the party structure. I mean, we have only seen established parties, more or less competing. There was a small moment, maybe a momentum, that there would be a move from the civil society. But when you compare that with other countries, in the neighborhood or in France or in Italy, the established parties have problems to survive. So what's the Hungarian idea behind that, or what are the motives? Second, you said that Fidesz could mobilize support, but mobilization doesn't come by itself. You need a very, very hard-working party structure. So maybe you can also comment on this element of organizing a party from the bottom to the top, and what was the element in this election? Thank you.
Why is Fidesz doing so well when mainstream parties at the center of society in other countries are going downhill? Well, there is a I would not dare to say change in paradigm, but there's certain a wind of change in political culture in Europe, the so-called populist challenge to mainstream politics. And I think if you had seen an attempt in Germany of the party in power to embrace that movement, you would have seen the result there as well. Here in Hungary, the difference is that the party in power has embraced this development rather than trying to fight it.
Yeah, so, and it's also very important what Hans Spengler said, that, and it brings us back to the urban-rural conflict. So I think the Fidesz, I think that the Fidesz could be, the reason why the Fidesz could be more successful in the rural areas is exactly what you mentioned, that they have the mobilization strategy, they have the activists, they are on the field, they are present, and they have the party structure which is capable of managing this political task. And the other parties, the opposition parties, they are disappeared. So they are not present in the rural areas. That's why the Fidesz could dominate those voters so much. And it's not a problem for small opposition parties who are targeting the young and the elite voters because they can reach them through the media and through the social media. But these rural areas we cannot reach only through social media and only through national media. It's just you have to be physically there and you have to be present in the area. And yeah, I don't know whether the opposite parties realize that and they just were not successful to solve this problem, or they didn't see this problem, but that's a problem for the opposition. And after the collapse of the opposition strategy and after this huge defeat, electoral defeat, right now there is a gap in the opposition party structure. So all the opposition parties, they are collapsed. Gábor Vona is not anymore there. The only exception is LMP, who did quite well. But on the socialist side and on the Jobbik side, so they will be smaller than they are right now. So there is a gap on the opposition side, and I can imagine that a new force, a new En Marche movement will come, but without a brand, without a person, it just cannot happen. So first we need a person, and then we need a brand, and then they need the media, and then they need the structure, and then it can happen. That's what the Momentum wanted to achieve, but according to my interpretation, the Momentum, there was an issue, there was the moment, but the person was not enough, to put it like this.
Can I just stay on this topic for a second and ask you both this question? As far as I can see, neither the social media nor the civil society movement played a major part in this election. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it looks like that, superficially at least. But of course, they are there still. There's a gap, as you both just said, on the opposition party side. In general, the civil society movement tends to lean to the left. If I were a hostile critic, I could say they are in fact single-issue political parties. And unlike the major parties, they don't go to sleep between elections. They're active all the time. And so if the opposition is going to mount a challenge to Fidesz, isn't it going to be by these two avenues? And secondly, how would the government be able, so to speak, lawfully and morally be able to counter that?
Well, the one thing that it seems that I can observe on the social media is that the subjects that the opposition talked about in the campaign were quite successful on social media. So they were not so present in the general media, but on social media, these subjects, education policy, health policy and all that, was quite present on the social media. So that has not gone away. It remains alive. And I agree with Balázs that we may see the emergence of some kind of some kind of movement on the left, but we may also see something different in the absence of that. If that does not happen, I see a possibility of radicalization on the left, of street protests and a general sharpening of the tone on the left side, fed by frustration and yes, the lack of something that can channel, provide an avenue for people who think in this way.
Yes.
Mr. Kalaki has to leave in 10 minutes for another engagement. So I'm going to take 2 questions. Oh, there are now, oh goodness, there are 5 questions.
Hello, I have a question.
Let's collect all the questions now, quickly, and then I'll ask the 2 speakers to respond to them, but also to sum up. So first of all, over there.
I'll try to be short. I'm Daniel Shimor. I'm a reporter for Hier TV. And my question is, what you think will happen to NGOs, the still independent, sort of independent media that is independent from the government in the next couple of months? This question is also of personal sort, because I wonder if I will have my job 6 months from now. Yes, so this also about the NGOs. The first thing they said that they will accept, they will pass the Stop Soros law package. Do you think they feel the need after this landslide victory to get rid of more of the independent media that still exists in the country, and the NGOs also?
My name is Sándor Kerekes, and I don't represent, but I work for the Canadian-Hungarian Journal. First of all, let us keep our sober ideas about this unbridled gloating. And first of all, Mr. Orbán, I think you should slip in here a correction. In 2016, the referendum did not mention anything about sovereignty, and by the way, the government lost that referendum. However, you all 3 carefully avoided mentioning the skewed electoral laws as the reasons of the win, and also the press concentration. Now, the aforementioned Mr. Gulyás often mentions that there are all over in Europe similar laws of election and press concentration and so on. So I defy you to name one country with electoral laws like ours. And once you are doing that, might as well compare these laws to Dominic Acerbo's laws of 1923 in fascist Italy, that is almost verbatim the same as ours. So maybe you should do a little bit of clarification here. Thank you.
My name is Linda Horvath. I'm the wife of János Horvath, who spent 16 years in the Hungarian parliament and previously spent 2 years in the Hungarian parliament back in 1945. At the time, he was a representative of the Smallholders Party, and the missing party now is the Smallholders Party from the small towns. If he were here, he would talk valiantly about this. It needs a leader, it needs money, we have met some people who are possible leaders, and we pray that whoever that is will emerge, because it's a missing party in Hungary. Okay.
I'm sorry. Thanks. My name is Camilla Strauss, and I'm studying at Corvinus University, so maybe I am the voice of the youth. And that's why I want to ask about, especially what Mr. Orbán said, that the youth are not represented in the voting. And I want to ask that, do you think it is, I don't know, we can't manage to move the young people? Because it was my first voting and I was so excited that I can be the part of the thing that I can change the country. And that's why I don't understand why do you think that most of the young people are not down for vote. Thanks.
You seem to have a very good demographically selected audience.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Bence Bauer. I'm the project coordinator of the Konrad-Adenauer Stiftung, so Mr. Spengler is my boss. But I have 3 short questions to the Századvég Foundation. Could you elaborate, Balázs, a little bit more on the composition of the Fidesz electorate, first of all? Could you elaborate where actually the massive gain of 300,000 to 500,000 votes that Fidesz had now in comparison to 2014, where they came from, how these voters are? And do you have some analysis about voters' migration in comparison to 2014, 2018, where the voters went to? In Germany, we have always these very nice charts, which party lost to which other party. How is that? Thank you.
Gentlemen, I estimate that you've got 8 separate questions to answer, plus any final concluding remarks of your own. I'm going to begin, Boris, with you, because you may have to slip away, I know. So
only 4 for me, I think 8 were for Balázs. And I will answer those 4, or that I can answer. Kisgazda párt. You're right in a very specific sense that its disappearance is the reason why we have Jobbik today. The problems of the countryside were missing a political voice, a political representation. In the Budapest bubble, if someone told politicians that someone stole the potatoes from János Bácsi's field, they would laugh, but János Bácsi was very angry, and that had political consequences. So yes, in a way that party is missing. NGOs, while who was it? Here TV, NGOs. While I always belonged to those who thought it was a very bad idea to have the anti-Soros campaign, I am pretty much certain that Mr. Orban now thinks it was highly successful because it contributed to his success. So I would surmise that yes, that package of laws will be passed in Parliament. Electoral laws. John, how is it with the winner-takes-all system in the United Kingdom?
Well, the winner-takes-all system, if that had applied here, the winner would have taken all, because I think there were only, in the single-member constituencies, I think the opposition only won 3 seats outside Budapest, won the majority, but so it would have been an absolute
So that's the answer to that question. Even playing field, while you do have a point, and the OSCE does have a point in saying that there was probably not an even playing field in terms of media coverage. I would add to that as a footnote that in the social media, the focus was on opposition themes rather than government themes, so we have to see that as well. And I would also maybe ask, when is there ever an even playing field in any country in terms of media coverage? It's nearly impossible. We never have 50% on this side and 50% on that side. If you have a quick look at Germany, do you think there is an even playing field in terms of media coverage for a party like the AfD? When they will not be invited to public broadcasters and private media fire away at them, of course there's not an even playing field there, but no one says it's undemocratic.
Boris, thank you very much indeed. If you slip away, we'll understand, and thank you.
Thank you, briefly. The first question. What we experienced is that George Soros actively involved himself and his organization structure in the campaign. And the Prime Minister Orban, thinks that the opposition was partly or mainly dominated by Soros, which is not far from the fact. And Avaz, for example, one organization influenced by George Soros was spend extremely huge amount of money in the social media. So George Soros was present in the campaign. That's according to my interpretation, it's out of question. It sounds to me quite logical that the Prime Minister tries to do something against this kind of foreign influence. That was part of their political strategy. That was the only thing which was very understandable for the voters, that if the Fidesz wins, this will come, and they voted for Fidesz. So something will definitely happen. And the questions in connection with the media freedom and media coverage, I think it's, as a foreigner, it's not easy to understand Hungarian media, because the Hungarian media structure, I think it's plural but extremely polarized. And that's a huge difference. That's a huge difference, because in Western European countries, the media is not so polarized. So there you can find some media platforms which are not so visibly and extremely close to one political party. So you cannot say their political affiliation. That's not an existing phenomenon in Hungary. In Hungary, you can say, and you can see, it's very visible that every media platform has some kind of political affiliation. It means that that it comes from it that the media is extremely polarized. And I think this polarization and the pluralism which comes from this polarization will stay with us. So I don't see the chance that there will not be critical voice present in the Hungarian media right now. And
will the government make efforts to change this?
I don't know. You should ask them. And the referendum, the reference to the previous referendum, I know this interpretation. I read a lot of articles about it. Yeah, I know, but it's also an opinion, and I think it's an interpretation. And I read a lot of articles in the international media and in the Hungarian media that the government lost the referendum. But simply, if somebody wants to establish a political strategy based on this, based on that the government lost the referendum, they will fail. Average Hungarian voters, and to be told honestly, everybody in Hungary thinks that the government won the migration issue and won the referendum. And the opposition, it was the opposition, and it was the Jobbik who made a huge political mistake after the referendum, that they didn't support the Fidesz constitutional amendment. So, first of all, every opposition party should accept this, and then after, with this acceptance, they can build up a strategy. And the mobilizing of the youth question, that's a general fact, not only in Hungary, but all around the Western democracies. They are not so active. Younger generations, they are not so active. There are some tools which are there to increase the level of their turnout, but they are not effective enough right now. The next question, where the Fidesz, the new Fidesz supporters are coming from, what we can see that the turnout was the biggest in those constituencies and those small areas where the Fidesz used to be the stronger. So it turned out that these new voters came from those areas where the Fidesz is originally stronger, the constituencies which are more right-oriented. So the new voters did not came from the opposite side. They came from the Fidesz garden, I mean the Fidesz backyard. And they just were not present. They were not visible during the previous elections, but they were there, and the mobilization strategy of Fidesz was very, very effective. And yeah, the question you asked, whether we have publicly available charts like in the German elections, no, we don't have. And currently, I don't think that it's available. I don't know whether any other think tanks or public opinion poll organizations will do something like this. Right now it's not available. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've just had, I think, an extremely balanced, interesting, fascinating discussion of the election that dug deep at times and very deep. And it's raised a series of questions which, at the Danube Institute, we want to explore further on future occasions. I mean, one, for example, is going to have to be the future role and the future laws for civil society organizations, because they are increasingly important in Western politics everywhere. So I want to begin by saying that this has been, I think, an extremely productive occasion. Secondly, obviously, the reason for that is Boris Kolnacki and Balázs Urban, who know what they're talking about and who had a number of fascinating insights which we wouldn't have discovered, I think, anywhere else. I want to thank them both, but since you're here and Boris is gone, let us particularly thank you and say that we want to see you on future occasions. I want to thank the audience for coming. I think it's been I hope it's been as useful for them as it certainly has been for me as a future conference planner. So thank you very much.